There's a lot of choice when it comes to weapons and builds in Hades 2, and early on, my favorite was absolutely Liminoe's the Sister Blades. Over time, the others definitely have grown on me, and now I'd say if I had to pick a favorite, it would actually probably be the Staff with Aspect of Momus, which I have a video about as well. You can see it after this up in the card and down below. But recently, I had a really good run on the Sister Blades, something that went incredibly well up until the very end. I did end up succeeding, and it was Fear 12, but it also goes to show sometimes hitting really hard, while very flashy and fun, isn't always enough. This was specifically on the aspect of Melinoe, which I haven't used a ton. Most of my previous runs have been either on Artemis or Pan, like the Artemis run you're seeing right now, that uses hook knives, spams the special, and absolutely nuke stuff. Turns out that's the archetype that I prefer rather than an Omega attack version, even if the Omega attack version does get some really big numbers. So let's go through things. I'll talk about my decision making. And hey, if you like seeing builds and runs in Hades 2, get subscribed because I've been enjoying the hell out of this game. So first up, Aspect of Melinoe on the Sister Blades gives you a big backstab bonus. I decided what better to go with backstabbing than Aspect of Aphrodite, and I'd kind of build around whatever she offered me. She offered me a very nice attack boon, which meant I was going to be going attack spam. Having the 140% modifier on your attack lets you hit hard enough that the early game was very, very smooth. Even without the backstab, most enemies went down within a couple hits. Shortly after that, I encountered Hestia, and so I decided that my secondary support boon was going to be the Hestia cast. This is a really good fire and forget style thing where you drop a circle, it scorches a bunch of stuff, and it gets really good free AoE damage in. If you have a lot of single targets, such as from the Aspect of Melinoe backstab, this is a great choice. So then I continued clearing until I came across a Daedalus hammer. This is where my build really gets defined, because right now I have a good attack boon, and so I decided to lean into that because I'd never played an explosive ambush build before. Explosive Ambush gives a massive boost to the Omega attack. Ideally, you pair this with a backstab bonus to absolutely destroy your enemies, but maximizing your backstab uptime can be a little bit tricky. You'll see about that a little later. But in short, going into Hecate, my damage felt really good, and overall I was quite confident. Maybe even a little overconfident. I ended up picking up Hephaestus on my special to proc Blast, which I thought was just a nice fire and forget AoE. Turns out it was going to be way more crucial to my success than I ever imagined. And so that's the core of my build, which honestly doesn't change all that much for the rest of a run. Aphrodite attack for the core of my damage, attack spam or Omega attack, hitting really, really hard with the Omega attack because of Explosive Ambush, using the Hestia cast and Hephaestus special to proc extra effects for passive DPS. Leaving the first area, I swapped out my beautiful mirror for a crystal figure. Might as well get a free Arcana card, since I didn't feel like I needed anything else at that time. Then moving on to Oceanus, I had a really, really easy run. Normally, I hate the eel that's one of the elites there, but thankfully I was able to deal with him pretty easily by relying on the burst damage from my special, dropping Scorch, and smacking him a bit, then moving out of range as the opportunity presented. The build worked really well on what is a notoriously annoying fight, especially for positional builds. This built my confidence, which sometimes is not a good thing because pride comes before the fall, and this build definitely flew a little bit too close to the sun. Now, if there was anything that I missed here, it was Poseidon. Outside of the Omega attack, my AoE was a bit low, but because your Omega attack moves you directly into melee range of a bunch of stuff, while you do absolutely massive damage, one-shot stuff, knock off their armor, blah blah blah, it's a little risky. I was hitting for 650, it was really, really satisfying, and I even managed to pick up an Aphrodite boon for magic recovery on bosses so long as there's a weak enemy nearby, but I took some unnecessary damage by going really close into melee range. And also, by the end of this area, I picked up a boon that full healed me, provided I had at least 70 and then 60% health when exiting a room, which I felt would make it really, really easy to get to Chronos, and turns out that assumption was absolutely correct. While my build did pretty good damage overall in the Sirens, of course, I struggled a little bit with Scylla herself, since you can't backstab her. Darn clamshells in the way. But with those bosses down and with my health mostly recovered, it was on to the fields. And again, there weren't too many things I specifically needed. My attacks already hit like a truck, I had solid magic recovery on boss fights, and if anything, my goal from here was health and utility. But hey, if someone's going to offer you a Skull King slice for 200% backstab bonus, well, you're going to take it, especially because certain bosses are very easy to backstab, and others you can't backstab at all, but hey, that boss was already down, so it's fine. Now, I did take a little bit of extra time on the Elite because he was able to heal. That said, I didn't struggle too much on him, I just had to clean up all the ads first, avoid his attacks, and then deal that massive backstab damage to rapidly finish him off when he was left alone. It wasn't quite the insta-delete that I faced with some other builds, but it definitely felt good. I should have realized this was a sign of what's to come, and not in a good way. Instead, I didn't realize that and continued clearing enemies, and it was going really, really well. Within 1 or 2 Omega attacks, I was able to clear armor off enemies and then defeat them with a rapid flurry of blows. Even relatively annoying foes like wolves really didn't prove all that much of a challenge to this build, because as it turns out, if you hit for 600 to 800, most enemies really do fall over and there's not much they can do about it. Then I got to Cerberus. Cerberus presents a massive target, so it was Backstab City time, and this was one of the easiest Cerberuses that I'd done in a very long time. Whenever Cerberus did something that forced me to move out of melee range, I simply threw out my cast or threw out my special. Whereas, if I was able to fight Cerberus within melee range, it was all about Omega, 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 and of course, using the weak by standing near Cerberus to fuel things. So in short order, I ended up freeing Cerberus and moving on to Tartarus, the final region. Here's where I made my second really big mistake. I swapped to Blackened Fleece for my Keepsake instead of something like Knucklebones. But I thought, hey, I have 5 Death's Defiance. How badly can this go? Oh, how little did I know. Because as it turns out, if you invite disaster, disaster absolutely comes knocking. From there, I decided to clear through Tartarus, mostly looking for utility upgrades rather than focusing on damage. I already hit hard enough, but I did want, a little bit of extra life and a few extra defenses where available. This is where there's definitely a few cracks which started to show through in my plan, because I was taking a lot of damage. Never enough to knock me below the 60% health threshold, but the fact that I was easily losing 20 to 30% of my health on every single room probably should have been a warning to me that my attack style was a little bit on the clunky side, and yes, it hit hard, but it probably wasn't actually worth it. At least not without the ability to crit, because who doesn't want to see 2000s popping up on their screen, even if it means you take a lot of damage? Now, the Hestia cast and Hephaestus combo felt amazing. I wanted to spam my attacks on the smaller foes, and I wanted to not have to worry about swarms of enemies. I wanted to use the Omega attack to break armor on larger foes so that I could crowd control them with the rapid flurry of strikes. Being able to prime this stuff and mop up AoE enemies, or just deal an extra nice chunk of damage in a burst with the Hephaestus throw, really helped my ability here. And there's so many fights that could have gone much worse, I probably would have burned Death Defiances in Tartarus if it wasn't for these utility skills. And then I got to Chronos, and I struggled hard. Because yes, my Omega attack did 700 plus damage, and even close to 1,000 when backstabbing. But the positioning and charge up was very difficult. I ended up getting hit because I mispositioned, or because I missed with my Omega attack and was like, wait, why did the damage not happen? Turns out, you can have all the damage in the world and still struggle if that damage is very conditional. So I ended up burning way more health than I wanted to on the first phase. But going into the second phase, I thought, it's not that big of a deal. Until he spawned his ads, and then everything absolutely fell apart. I was burning Death Defies left, right, and center because I'd mispositioned by a little bit. I'd get hit by something, get frozen, get hit by something else. His attack would crash into me, or I'd charge up something, I'd use the downtime perfectly, and simply miss the boss. So, if you are lured in by the big flashy numbers, personally, I think the special spam version of this with hook knives is absolutely the way to go. Because with the special spam version, in addition to having, honestly, just as much burst damage, maybe a little less, you might not hit for the 1,000-ish, but you'll still be hitting for 600-700. You can get a lot of backstab damage in. Your backstabs are guaranteed against any enemy that can be backstabbed because the knives will travel out, then fly backwards. And you can safely do it from range, especially if you're able to charge things up beforehand. Now, luckily, despite all that, I did end up succeeding. At the last minute, I said, you know what? I'm just going to play very safe, wait for my special cooldown, throw a knife. Wait for my special cooldown, throw a knife. Toss out a cast when I have an opening. Don't go in for attacks. Don't charge up your Omega. Don't worry about any of that. Just slow and steady wins the race. So I chipped him down, and I did end up beating Chronos. But man, that's one of the hardest fights I've had since the first time I encountered him. And even if at the very end I did make a mistake, and I'm sure that would have killed me, but luckily between my dodge from Hermes and Echo, thankfully I was safe from my mistake. So now let's go into a few more specifics about the build and kind of do a post-mortem. Alrighty, so hair's pred the victory. Sounds about right. I had 10 health left, which is kind of sad given that I went into a fight with something like 5 Death's Defiance. But it turns out, if all of your damage comes from Flutter Strike, which is a very close range, and also it's from charging up the Omega version and backstabbing Chronos, it's really hard to pull that off if you are not good at backstabbing Chronos. There are so many times where I charged up my Omega attack and got hit, or charged up my Omega attack and jumped directly into one of his damaging moves, or charged up my Omega attack and I simply wasn't close enough to Chronos to actually pull it off. So ultimately what carried me to victory was the Volcanic Flourish. It's a good lesson in you can have all the damage in the world, but sometimes it just isn't enough, especially with these very finicky positional builds. So while I do think Aspect of Melinoe for a full backstab build on the Twin Blades is super fun, you also have to be pretty good to succeed with it, or maybe just better than me in this case. I'm sure with practice I'll get better at backstabbing and I'll get better at attacking enemies. But having something like the Volcanic Flourish, a really strong fire and forget ranged option, is absolutely critical to a build like this. I got down to 10 life and I stopped taking risks. I was like, and so first up, Volcanic Flourish for being the absolute MVP and carrying me to victory. Beyond that, the reason I was hitting for 600, 900, 1000 is a combination of Omega Attack plus Explosive Ambush, where it did plus 400% damage, Skulking Slice for another plus 200% if I got the backstab, and Flutter Strike for another 145. In other words, I was doing something like plus 1000% damage almost. I mean, it's about 700 in these modifiers and then a couple more hundred in other things that I had. So all in all, it was just below 1000% damage, which is why I was hitting so hard. Which is why I was able to completely destroy Cerberus, because it was very easy for me to get behind him. But the highly mobile boss, Chronos, who's also super scary and he can't time slow, yeah, turns out that's a different beast entirely. Then in terms of other boons that did pretty well, Smoldering. This way I could throw something out for passive damage. I did end up enabling the ranged version, so I could fire it from a distance. That was really, really cool. All I had to do, just keep on chilling and I was totally fine. Something I underutilized was Soot Sprint. I absolutely should have been sprinting through more enemy ranged projectiles to give me more space to deal damage, especially on the Chronos fight. Healthy Rebound was of course very, very helpful in getting me to the Chronos fight, because I took a lot of damage along the way and it didn't matter since I just healed up. And last but certainly not least, Glamour Gain. Without this, I absolutely would not have survived. Coming over to Arcana, I've been trying out a little bit of a new deck here, where it's still the same core of Sorceress, Titan, Boatman, Eternity, Excellence, but instead of going for magic recovery, I've been going for things like the Seer that give me the option to modify what I get within a run. For a build like this, I think it's down to personal preference. If you're not going Aphrodite, you absolutely want the magic regen or maybe Silver Wheel, but if you're going Aphrodite, you're probably going to have pretty good options there. Poseidon's another one that gives really good magic recovery where you don't necessarily need it from your Arcana. Then this was, of course, 12 Fear. So I had Vow of Arrogance, because if you play around it, it's not a big deal. Vow of Wandering, if you can deal with the enemies in the next region, you can deal with them in the region before. Vow of Haunting for the Revenant, and Vow of Dominance. I was thinking of adding a timer. Ultimately, I think I would have made it, but having the time pressure probably would have caused me to play worse on Chronos, where it could have easily ended my run. So ultimately, I'm not as happy about this one as I was about the previous one. I'd say Momus made the game feel easy. This one, it's super satisfying and rewarding if you get it right, but if you don't get it right, you're probably going to die. So if you're looking for easy wins on Lim and Oros, I recommend going with Aspect of Pan instead of this. If you're looking for a really fun backstab playstyle, my personal recommendation would be to go with a Hook Knife Special Spam version. That said, if you are a god gamer and you're like, 30 Fear doesn't do anything to me, I'm going to go for Max Fear and make it look easy, then maybe this is a build you can pull off. But at least for me personally, it was definitely rougher than I expected. But hey, it's all a good learning experience, and I did win in the end, which is why I wanted to share the build with all of you. If you want to see a run that went much, much better, check out my Aspect of Momus machine gun build, which cleared Fear 12 and did make it look easy. With that said, I'm curious. What run have you done recently where you were super confident going in and then it just all completely fell apart? Let me know some of your failures down in the comments below, because that way we can all learn from each other's mistakes and hopefully fail a bit less ourselves. Now, of course, before I go, a special thanks to my patrons and channel members for the continued support. For as low as $1 a month, you can make videos just like this one possible. Link to support is down below. And thank you to everyone who watched to the end. If you've already seen my other Hades 2 build, then let me know, which style did you like better, me talking about the build up front or me talking about the build towards the end of a video? This is a new style of video for me. I'll experiment a bit and probably go for whatever feels best in the long run, but hey, I'm a little curious about your thoughts as well. So with that, I'm glad you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one.